Welcome to Inside India. I'm Amitod Singh, and these are your headlines. The Indian rupee knocking on the door of 90 to the US dollar as the RBI kicks off its meeting in what could be a very close call. SoftBank-backed Indian e-commerce company Meesho opens its IPO books today as it looks to raise over $600 million US dollars after securing some key global anchor investors. And Apple challenges India's antitrust law, raising tensions between the US tech giant and Indian authorities. All right, let's take a look at the Asian markets. The markets mostly opening higher on the day, slightly mixed. They're tracking that bounce back on Wall Street as hopes of a U.S. interest rate cut gains momentum. The fears around Japan's looming rate hike remain, but the brief sell-off that resulted in global bond markets may have eased a bit. Japan's Nikkei it rose as tech stocks tracked Wall Street gains, right now at 1.13%, and the Kospi at 1.06%, rising, really leading the Asian markets. But what you're seeing in China, in Shanghai, is slight down, and in Hong Kong also we're seeing about almost 1% down. But remember, US stocks, they recorded a 6th straight gain in 7 sessions, so that's what the market is weighing right now. But also, we want to bring you this latest data that's come in. Global growth is holding up better than expected, thanks largely to a boom in AI investment, which the OECD says is helping offset the drag from US tariff hikes. In its latest outlook, the Paris-based organization keeping global growth steady at 3.2% for 2025, slipping to 2.9% in 2026 before rebounding in 2027 to 3.1%. It revised up its U.S. forecast with AI spending, fiscal support, and expected Fed rate cuts cushioning tariff impacts. But it also flagged rising U.S. deficits as a growing risk. China, Japan, and the Eurozone also saw modest upgrades, but the OECD warns that new trade tensions or a reversal of AI optimism could trigger a market correction.
However, our outlook highlights key fragilities on the horizon, from elevated trade restrictions to policy uncertainty and concerns about supply chain security, to rising public spending pressures from increased defense requirements and the rising economic and fiscal impacts of population aging, and vulnerabilities associated with high financial asset valuations, such as for AI-related investments and cryptocurrencies.
What about India? For India, the OECD says the risks are broadly balanced despite pressure from US tariffs. It expects real incomes to rise in India and declining borrowing costs to keep investment buoyant. Now, this comes as the Reserve Bank of India has begun its 3-day policy meeting today. A Reuters poll suggests the RBI may deliver a 25 basis point cut on Friday, taking the repo rate to 5.25%. But with strong Q2 growth and benign inflation, the big question is whether the central bank will stay on its easing path. The RBI has already cut rates by 100 basis points this year. And that's why we're going to be taking a look at the Indian markets. They're coming online in about 45 minutes. They've been reacting. They've been choppy. They've been going up and down. Here's what GIFT Nifty futures are indicating. A bit of a muted start at this point in time, awaiting that decision from the RBI. Will the Indian market really react to the RBI's meeting, which has started? Not today, perhaps, because the decision only comes out on Friday. But GIFT Nifty indicating an end to a 3-session losing streak. Potentially we're muted. It could be positive. Remember, Nifty did hit record peaks after 14 months last week. Foreign money still flowing out of India for 4 consecutive sessions to the tune of about 400 million USD. The pressure is really on the rupee, and that's the main focus, as it did really weaken to a record low of almost 90 against the dollar, and the RBI's decision could impact that further. We are still waiting to see if any intervention has taken place in the last couple of hours from the RBI's side. The focus will also be on SoftBank-backed e-commerce firm Meesho ahead of its initial public offering, which begins today. All right, with us to discuss all of that, a lot of things to discuss, is Sanjay Mathur. He's the Chief Economist of Southeast Asia and India at ANZ. It's a great pleasure to be speaking to you, sir, right here in the Singapore studios.
It's my pleasure to be here, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please don't call me, sir. I don't deserve that. Thank you. Okay, I want to start by, what the focus is on. The RBI's meeting is kicking off. Presentations will be going on in the next couple of hours. Economists like yourself will be speaking to the RBI and giving them their point of view. The rate at 5.5% currently, could it be cut to 5.25%? That's the question on everyone's mind. It's a coin toss. You and I discussed this. But I want to quote Astha Gudwani. She's the chief economist at Barclays, because she's flipped her call, all right, for a rate cut on Friday to a status quo. And she says the following: for a forward-looking central bank, as important as it is to look through backward encouraging data, both low inflation and solid growth, the GDP print today cannot be ignored in our view. What's your take?
So let me start off with the GDP data and what our take is. Now, if you look at that 8.2% growth number, undoubtedly, the direction of travel was absolutely positive. There's no doubt about it that activity did pick up during the quarter. Having said that, our view is also that 8.2% was a slightly optimistic estimate. I think it's just the mechanics of India's growth accounting. Particularly when you have very low deflators, it tends to sort of augment economic activity. Now, that is not exactly in sync with the corporate earnings we are seeing. We're not seeing that in many other parameters. And then if I look at the more forward data, which is admittedly little, but we had the PMI number for November, and that sort of fell to a 9-month low. So we have to take all these issues into account. Then you have the issue of inflation. Now, by all counts, our RBI is going to lower its full-year inflation forecast of 2.6%. We also think, if you just look at the trend, and we do think inflation probably has inflected at its lowest point now and it should rise, is it really going to get to 4%? That's the second part. The third, I think, is that's important to note, is that the RBI governor, last time when he spoke to Z Business, he was sort of he alluded to the fact that nothing much has changed. Yeah. And if you were to lower rates, would you take advantage of it now if you want to aspire for faster growth, which is also something that the RBI has said. Yeah. So when I put all that together, I do not see why a 25 basis points rate cut should not happen on Friday.
Okay. Very, very interesting factors. You said that the GDP is overestimated, but how much do you estimate it to be then?
So we use a nowcasting model.
Yeah.
And GDP is not unduly weak, but we think it's somewhere at about 6.5%, which is a good number.
6.5% compared to the 8.2% that's been reflected. Okay.
Yes.
And this is primarily because of the mechanics, the way they calculate the data and the deflators, and low deflators. Okay.
That said, I think in today's global context, as well as the fact how the Indian economy has performed in the previous quarters, I should say this is not a bad number, but neither is it an aspirational level.
Okay, I understand. You're noticing that there are economists like Astha who are changing their position. Did you think about changing your position?
We did think about it, and then we analyzed the data. We looked at where real rates were, etc. And we came to a conclusion.
Yes, it's a tough call is the point. It's a tough call.
Absolutely a tough call.
Got it. Let me ask you this. Everything seems to be good, right? The GDP number is good. Tariffs were pretty close to a deal. Inflation is low. Why do you need to cut? I mean, I know you made the point about the next year you'll have to cut and you need growth to rise, but how much?
So I think that a couple of things we should note. One, even after the rate cuts, we haven't seen a major pickup in bank lending so far. So that definitely is a consideration. Two, I know that we've been getting closer and closer to a trade deal, but I cannot convincingly say as to when it will actually happen. And it did show up in the trade data we had for October that exports to the US have slipped. So there is a case to augment demand as much as we can at this stage.
All right. How much does the rupee factor into the discussions that the RBI will be having today and tomorrow before the decision? Because it's lost 4.6% this year. It's set to become the worst performing in Asia as the currency. And also remember that there is a sentiment that plays out both politically and in living rooms in India once it hits 90. Oh my God, the 90s hit 90. The rupees hit 90 to the US dollar. You know this because, So I just want to understand your view on this. Yeah.
I guess that psychological level also was the case when the rupee was getting to 80, to be honest.
90 seems...
Yes, it seems a lot.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues that I want to highlight over here is that we have assumed that interest rate differentials is the sole driver of the rupee. Now, at this point in time, when you look at real rates in India or real rate differentials, say with the US, they're pretty solid and on the white side. The question is, if you do cut rates and that brings foreign investors back into the equity market, that should help the rupee.
Do you think it will happen?
It's hard to say, but I think that yes, a rate cut in a close call should definitely be positive.
Will foreign capital come because of that?
There should be a case for that because I think expectations of stronger earnings do build in.
Okay, couple of questions related to this because there is an element, and you quoted the RBI governor in his interview with the Z News, his first Hindi interview apparently. But previously well, the RBI officially has unofficially or officially, unclear about that, but they have alluded to the idea that the reason that there is some kind of intervention happening, they are defending the rupee because they feel there's some speculative attack happening on the rupee. All right. And they don't, it's not so much about volatility, but because they feel there's a speculative attack. I just want your take on that.
There was a statement earlier, but I don't see that from the markets. If anything, I think given that for 3 years the rupee was rock solid, there never really was a case to say that there is a sudden speculative attack. In fact, the thinking in the markets was that the RBI is targeting a very stable currency regime.
So then why are they intervening?
The intervention is important because what it does is that let's assume that the rupee goes to any level, on either side. The question really is, do you want that to happen in a day and disrupt businesses, or would you like it to be smooth?
Okay, so they don't, they're not that affected by the idea of a rupee slide as long as it's slow.
Well, they are not so much impacted by a weaker rupee as long as it happens in a gradual manner. Sudden volatile changes is something that probably is not acceptable to any central bank.
Okay. You talked about if there is a rate cut, it should theoretically at least bring in foreign money.
Yes.
But foreign outflows for the past 4 days consecutively, all right? We're looking at huge numbers regarding that. And how do you look at that outflow in the context of the GDP 8.2 data that we got, right? Because it became interesting specifically because all the estimates suggested, Reuters poll suggested it'll be 7.3%, but it was as high as 8.2. Now that's huge. And then that's when the conversation around the reliability of the data came into the picture a little bit more than it has in the previous ones. So is smart money ignoring the GDP data and saying we don't buy this? And that's why they're going out of the country at this point in time when GDP has just come, the data has just come?
I think it's difficult to sort of characterize it as a single reason just in terms of GDP.
Yeah.
Like I said, that the GDP data is sort of exaggerated, even though the economic momentum is positive, and that I think gets into consideration. That said, remember, foreign equity participation is like a beauty contest. You're looking at various parts of the world. And I think at this stage, I mean, the AI sort of boom is quite prominent, and it is showing up in different parts of Asia, perhaps less so in India, or at least in the listed space.
Noted.
So I think that definitely leads to a reallocation of funds.
Okay, that's interesting. We can bring up the OECD GDP data that actually showed India to be the fastest growing economy among G20 economies by like a big margin. And your estimate of the GDP was 6.5. Theirs is 6.7% in 2025, 6.2% in 2026, and 6.4% in 2027. How do you read India's tag of being the fastest growing economy amongst major economies in the global picture? And do you look at high frequency data when you think about that?
We do. And I think there are two parts to this. So on the positive side, I think if we look at a world where global growth has generally been stagnant, I mean, yes, there's an upgrade to global growth forecasts, etc. But at the same time, India's rock solid performance. Let's not look at the margin over here. it tells you something about the fact that domestic demand is a very solid anchor to structural growth in India. There are very positive developments that are happening, such as the rise of GCCs, etc., the growth of services exports that are related to it. So all those factors certainly point to optimism. Where I would be happier to see, and why I said that this growth rate is still not enough, is because I need per capita incomes. I need purchasing power to accelerate.
Okay. Can an emerging economy become a developed economy without foreign money coming in at the rate that it should, even if it is the fastest growing?
I think that is going to be a complicated task. And here I would say that even to sort of reach the rich economy status is going to be challenging for India. We do need more FDI. I'm not necessarily talking of portfolio flows. I think we do need more FDI. We do need the breadth to increase, and particularly when I say breadth to increase, more in manufacturing. I think, the telecom sector is definitely, the mobile phone industry.
We've been hearing this for a while, that we need the manufacturing to pick up pace. The question is, do you see it picking up pace?
At this point in time, I cannot answer that conclusively, because I don't see that happening across a breadth of industries.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. And any quick take on the tariff impact, because perception is perhaps greater than what the impact is on the markets, really?
The effective rate is definitely lower than the 50% that is prevailing. But I think the impact has really been somewhat muted than what we would think, but it's definitely there. And it's been muted simply for the fact that the US economy is so strong at this point in time that, as the OECD pointed out, that the strength of US demand sort of overcomes the tariff impact.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. That was riveting. It's always great to have you in the studio to talk about this. That was Sanjay Mathur of ANZ. All right, let's get moving and talk about what he was talking about, the US. The US President Donald Trump, he said that he'll be announcing his pick to replace Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell in early 2026. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett and Fed Governor Chris Waller are among the front runners. Trump is looking for a Fed chief who supports lower interest rates, a stance that could clash with a strong economy and stubborn inflation heading into next year. Here's more of what Trump had to say.
And mortgage rates, despite the fact that we have an incompetent chairman of the Fed, a real dope, who should reduce rates. I saw even Jamie Dimon said he should be reducing rates. I never saw Jamie Dimon say that. I wonder why he said that. But he really said it because he's right. But we have a guy that's just a stubborn ox who probably doesn't like your president, your favorite president. But they're going to be coming down.
All right, coming up, more turbulence for Air India as the air carrier gets another inquiry order for a recent violation. We'll be back with the details after this short break. Welcome back. You are watching Inside India. Some of the stories we're keeping tabs on. Let's bring you those. So very interestingly, the French President Emmanuel Macron begins a state visit to China today at the invitation of President Xi Jinping. The Chinese Foreign Ministry announced Macron, who will start his trip with a visit to Beijing's Forbidden City, will meet President Xi on Thursday in the capital and again on Friday during a trip to Chengdu. This will be Macron's fourth state visit to China and follows Xi's visit to France last year, which marked the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Also, Russian President Vladimir Putin held more than 5 hours of talks at the Kremlin with US President Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The discussions stretched well past midnight as both sides explored a possible peace deal to end the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin called the meeting constructive but acknowledged that no breakthroughs or compromises were reached. Witkoff has been tasked with negotiating a path out of the conflict, a process made more difficult after a leaked set of 28 US draft peace proposals last week. Ahead of the talks, Putin accused European powers of having no peace agenda, claiming they aim only to obstruct negotiations. Here's part of what he said.
We are not planning to fight Europe. I have said this 100 times. But if Europe suddenly decides to wage war against us and starts it, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about that.
And Putin is set to arrive in New Delhi tomorrow. Ahead of that visit, a Kremlin spokesperson said Russia is continuing to find ways to maintain its oil export volumes despite US sanctions. He also said that Moscow will discuss with New Delhi how to keep their bilateral trade flowing in. Take a listen.
Tariffs between India and the United States is rather a question of bilateral relations between India and the United States. What concerns us is the way we're going to continue and enlarge the volume of our bilateral business with India, not letting anyone interfere in that. And this will be definitely discussed.
And yet another reputation problem for Air India. The air carrier is reportedly being investigated for a recent violation. CNBC's travel and transport reporter Monica Petrelli joins us now with the details. Monica, what's going on with Air India?
Sure. So Air India says that a glitch that was affecting its ability to process passengers yesterday evening, now over, but a far bigger problem for the company is news that an investigation has been launched following Air India's flying of one aircraft some 8 times despite it lacking a valid airworthiness review certificate. Now, officials say that this aircraft had been grounded for engine maintenance, at which point its certificate expired, but it returned to commercial service anyway. Now, Air India reported this lapse to investigators. It said that involved personnel have been suspended, and it has since called the incident regrettable. But this follows repeated warnings from authorities who have said that there have been numerous safety lapses this year, a year which saw the crash of Flight 171, which killed 260 passengers back in June. Investigations here still ongoing, but the Wall Street Journal reporting on Friday that tension between American and Indian investigators really reaching an all-time high, with the Americans reportedly frustrated over the pace and processes of the Indian inquiry. Now, the aircraft here at question, it's said to be an A320. Now, this has been in the news this week, this model, because Airbus has suffered not one but 2 issues with this model. First, the recall over the weekend, which saw airlines, including Air India, scrambling to update software. And then the second on Monday, dealing with metal panels on the fuselage. Now, this second issue not affecting aircraft that are in operation, but Airbus saying this would in fact affect deliveries for the year. The news upon both of these sent shares at Airbus down some 6.6% since Monday. It's back to you, Amatoj.
Yeah, Monica, but what happened to the shares of Boeing then?
So a very different story over at Boeing. Boeing saw its shares surge some 10% following comments from its CFO, who said that he's expecting that the company next year will see a positive free cash flow in the single digits, he said, but this based upon increased deliveries of jets, both 737s and 787s. So Boeing over there celebrating, Airbus not having nearly as good of a week. But we do see that this news from Airbus giving many hope that this years-long turnaround really hopefully ready for an injection next year that could see the air manufacturer turning profitable for the first time since 2018. It's back to you.
All right, Monica, thanks so much for that. Much appreciated. We'll come back to you because these developments aren't going anywhere just yet. They're going to be continuing to come in. All right, we're going to take a quick look at the Asian markets right now. Have a look. It's green at the top, but slightly red at the bottom. What we're seeing right now is positivity in Japan and South Korea. Japan really leading the market, but slight negativity in Hong Kong at the Hang Seng Index and in Shanghai, really. Remember, the US remaining positive about a Fed rate cut. And also, at this point in time, any fears that were there around Japanese bonds seems to have subdued, at least in the broader bond markets. But we're watching this very closely to get a sense of how things develop, and they do usually develop very quickly. On the other side of this short break, we're watching how India is aiming to open up its nuclear energy sector to private investment to reach its target of 100 gigawatt capacity by 2047. Will those investments really help the target? We will discuss that with Shah Nawaz Ahmed of the World Nuclear Association. We are counting down to the market open in India. We're not too far away from that, just about 15 minutes. At this point in time, it's looking like a muted start, mostly. Once again, Nifty 50 not going past and staying around the region of its record highs, flirting with it. But at this point in time, after yesterday, the concern is whether it will fall below 26,000. Remember, there you see the US dollar and the India rupee relationship also hitting that psychological mark of 90, which is really going to be playing into the minds of forex traders. And of course, the RBI, as it meets today, tomorrow, and then announces its decision to cut rates or not. That's something we're watching very closely. We'll come back to this in 15 minutes, give you a sense of how the market's open. But let's now move on to the other aspect that the market will be digesting. SoftBank-backed Meesho opens its IPO for subscriptions today. The e-commerce platform is targeting a valuation of about $5.6 billion as it looks to expand in a market dominated by Amazon and Walmart-owned Flipkart. The firm has set a price band of 105 rupees to 111 for its 3-day offering, with shares expected to list on December the 10th. Meesho, popular in smaller cities for its value-focused products, is also benefiting from recent tax cuts aimed at boosting consumption, and it plans to use IPO proceeds to fund cloud infrastructure, tech investments, and other expenses. The listing comes amid a red-hot IPO season in India, with tech names like Groww, Lenskart, and Physicswala already tapping markets. Total issuance this year is on track to beat last year's $20.5 billion, with another $8 billion expected in Q4. To our focus now, India is seeking to deepen its commitment to nuclear energy as the net oil importer seeks energy security. The government is considering amendments to its nuclear legislative to encourage private sector investment. India's atomic energy bill currently does not allow participation from private firms or even state governments. Amendments to the bill is slated to be tabled in the current winter session of the parliament, which started on December the 1st. This comes on the backdrop of India's ambitious target of 100 gigawatts of nuclear power capacity by 2047. Joining us now to talk about this is Shah Nawaz Ahmed. He's a senior advisor at the World Nuclear Association. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time, your precious time, and talking to us. I just want to get your overview first on this plan of the Indian government to bring it to Parliament, bring in this amendment, not one but two actually, in two different acts. How does that change the landscape in India? What do you think is going to happen?
Thank you. Foremost, we'd like to thank you for this opportunity for the World Nuclear Association to talk to you. Well, the most important thing is that presently the Atomic Energy Act, which is also proposed to be amended, permits only operation and ownership of nuclear power plants by central government, that is the federal government entities. So the first effort is to broaden the scope and get in more players into it. Currently, if you look at it, the private sector is largely involved with EPC work or supply of equipment. The design and ownership rests with the entities, largely Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited presently. So the Act proposes to permit more participation, not only Indian, but also foreign. That would require certain amendments in the Act itself, as well as some legislation that will encourage private players to join the nuclear commitments.
Yeah, I can already... Sorry, sir, I assumed that you had ended. Please continue.
No, the other act I just wanted to explain is for what is called the Liability Act. It presently permits recourse to suppliers, which has been something of a dampener in other entities entering the market. And this is proposed to be amended, perhaps largely to be in line with international laws. Yes, please.
Right. Thank you for that. That overview is helpful. I also want to just add a little context out here that the state of India's nuclear energy sector is interesting because right now we have around 24 to 25 reactors operating, 9 under construction, 12 approved for construction, and India makes about 8 gigawatts of nuclear capacity and is aiming for 100 gigawatts by 2047. Please, weigh in if you think I'm missing anything that's critical to understand. And talking about that liability aspect, you yourself just mentioned that it was a concern. Private firms had this hesitancy when entering or discussing this matter with government officials. They were concerned about the risk of unlimited exposure in the event of any incident. And we've already seen this development taking place with reports suggesting that the Adani Group itself is exploring opportunities to participate in India's nuclear power sector, goals to privatize, and that is interesting. But, and this is critical, an Adani official said the group has a strong interest in nuclear energy, but would require liability norms before moving forward. What color can you give us on what those liability norms are likely to be in this changed act?
Essentially, I would expect, of course, till the law is passed in Parliament, what would be the final version, but I would expect that this recourse would be made, maybe even removed in a certain way in the legal sense, because the liability may be limited to the value of the supply or the contract period of the order of the material or the equipment that has been delivered. But having said that, I would expect that the legal eagles would be looking at this very closely, because if we want international players, they would expect this to be in line with international agreements. I think that's where it will go.
What would that look like?
Well, see, liability, the only issue was that there was a recourse to suppliers. Now, if the liability of the suppliers is either limited or removed, then it becomes a level playing field internationally. So, and from that point of view, I think that we will see a resurgence of interest.
Okay.
That's I think what Adani was trying to say.
All right. Very interesting. I want to talk about one aspect, that if this liability clause is the essence of this bill and that is removed and that gives a little bit more security to these private players, what happens to the noise, or you can term it noise or you can term it concerns around potential for public protests and politics weighing on these decisions that are expected in Parliament, clearances, because we have seen protests around Not in My Yard. We have seen protests from the opposition parties. I just want to get a sense from you about how you see that playing out, because historically that's been a big issue.
Well, I think this is something that will play out, in my opinion, well, because of several reasons. One thing is they have been debated threadbare, so people do know what are the limitations. The second thing is that if you will remember, when certain protests had happened earlier, the court had decided that nuclear power has more benefits than disadvantages. This should also help in, should, God forbid, any legal issues come up. But at the end of the day, it is the economics, the need for power, the need to achieve net zero,
right,
to which many opposition parties are also committed. So okay, I would think that this should not be too difficult an issue.
That's interesting. One of the issues that is being debated around this conversation is the tariff determination. That is up for debate, because if this major policy decision actually goes through, the industry will be watching out for this aspect that fuel source is likely to become a key factor in regulating the rates. What's your take on that? How important is this aspect in the government making sure that there is confidence in private players coming into the sector?
Well, I think the first thing we need to remember is that the fuel cost in a nuclear power plant is a very small fraction of the total cost of the plant. So in terms of it affecting tariffs, would be minimal. Yes, India has made many agreements for supply of uranium. Things could become a bit more complex when new reactors, particularly SMRs, come with different types of fuel. But the market, uranium market, is fairly open, competitive, and stable.
Right.
There is also interest in opening new mines. So I would think that uranium would not be an issue as such. But yes, its security of supply will have to be arranged through maybe bilateral agreements, or whilst looking at the market more closely and making sure that it remains stable and profitable.
I think the key concern here has been speed, because we know that there's a deal with Canada as India and Canada's relationship is thawing, valued at about $2.8 billion USD to ship uranium from Canada to India. There's also this conversation around AI and data center hub activity in India that is going to become potentially a big part of India's AI sector. Electricity is the issue, right? The speed also with which we're going to get this nuclear energy to impact positively all of these sectors. So about that, are we fast enough, or are we not?
Well, see, in the what you call nuclear sector, the regulator plays a very important role, and therefore the knowledge base is very important. This is, I think, where India has been very lucky, because it has had a very long, comprehensive, and mature program. There are a lot of people, since India has a large number of reactors that have been operating for a very long time, it has a large pool of personnel. And it also, India has experience in handling several technologies. So this aspect should be India's strength. The other thing is that once you are trying to sort of bring in more electricity, more power, the trade-off between smaller reactors or SMRs and larger reactors would have to be considered. I would expect that as far as electricity is concerned, the larger reactors, the present standard reactors, would be contributing. The SMRs may be more niche, more customized, and for instance, we do talk of replacement of coal-fired plants by nuclear SMRs. So
right.
In that context, India's ability to accelerate should be taken as positive.
Okay.
Even smaller countries, like for instance, Sweden is a classical example, were rapidly able to build a large number of nuclear power plants. Of course, there may be constraints. There has been mentioned at some level about finance, but I think we have enough rich Indians around. Once committed, we would be at least able to raise the initial capital.
Okay.
And of course,
right.
As things progress, foreign capital should come in.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. The Nuclear Energy Mission of India allocating also 20,000 crore with the plan of developing at least 5 indigenously designed small modular reactors by 2033. So that's an interesting conversation we can continue to have the next time you're on. Thanks so much for joining us. That was Shah Nawaz Ahmed from the World Nuclear Association. We're going to be taking a short break, but before that, prices of silver hitting another record high. Take a look at that. The shiny metal has gone from strength to strength. This year, surging over 100%. And we'll be watching more of that after this. We're watching the markets. The rupee hitting another all-time low of 90. We're back in 2. Welcome back. The Indian markets are online. While a muted start out there, but look at what's happened with the Indian rupee. It has gone up over 90 and now gone back down at 89.9987. There you go. It's at 90 now to the dollar, weakening even as the Reserve Bank of India has started its MPC meeting to decide on whether it's going to cut rates, the decision on Friday. But there's a lot that's playing on the minds of traders, keeping in mind that you have an uncertain trade situation with the US, even though there's been enough talk about how India and the US are close to a deal. It's getting pushed from Thanksgiving all the way to the end of the year, and there's many other global uncertainties. We're watching this space very closely, but it's the Indian rupee that's in focus, the continued weakening of it, and at this point in time, no signs of an RBI intervention. All right, in the meantime, a battle is ongoing between Apple and India's competition regulator. Apple is challenging a law that allows penalties to be calculated on the basis of its global turnover. This after it was found guilty of breaching laws in a case where Indian startups and Tinder owner Match convinced the watchdog that Apple's in-app fees hurt smaller players. The iPhone maker argues that such a global turnover calculation would see the company facing risks of fines up to $38 billion. A lawyer of the watchdog accused Apple of attempting to stall proceedings since 2021. For its part, Apple, of course, denies any wrongdoing, adding that it's a much smaller player than Google's Android in India. The next hearing of the case, well, we're not sure when it is, but there are multiple reports, one saying that there's a hearing today and the other saying that there's a hearing on the 16th of December. And we have Gautam Shahi, a lawyer. He's a partner at Dua Associates, joining us not too far from the Delhi High Court where this is playing out in New Delhi. It's great to have you on. Perhaps you can clear the air for me. Is it December 16th or December 3rd that the hearing is the next one?
So I believe December 16th is the next date of hearing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Now, let me just ask you a larger question about what's happening. This is interesting because you yourself in a report have been quoted as saying that the amended law is clear that the Competition Commission of India can consider global turnover. And you've also said it will be difficult to convince the court to interfere with clearly laid down legislative policy. But this is Apple we're talking about. This is probably going to go to the Supreme Court. What's your take on this?
Yes. So, Amitosh, let's get a bit of a background here. The Act was passed in 2002. Certain amendments were carried out. The version which was applicable since 2009 was passed in 2007. And there itself, the provision was for penalty based on turnover. It did not clarify whether it was global turnover or turnover from India itself. Now, in 2017, there was this Excel Corp case before the Supreme Court of India, where Supreme Court said, all right, since the language of the law is only about turnover, we should consider only the relevant turnover, that is the turnover from the product under consideration. Under the 2023 amendments, which were notified in March 2024, the lawmakers of India have clarified that turnover means global turnover. So they have added an explanation under the relevant provision, saying when we talk about turnover for the purposes of calculating penalty, it means the global turnover of an enterprise. So the law has been laid clear now. There are certain fundamental tenets of all legal systems. Under the Indian legal system, once the legislative policy is clear, Supreme Court will not interfere with it unless it is clearly shown that the said law is violative of the Constitution of India. And that's a very difficult thing to show. Also, in light of the fact that similar provision exists in EU and UK. That is why I said that it will be, sure, please.
No, I was actually coming to that because I want to understand that even if the Delhi High Court, disagrees with Apple and the matter then goes to the Supreme Court, as has happened, there's precedent-setting situations like this. What will be Apple's case constitutionally to the Supreme Court? Because at this point in time in the filing, what Apple is saying is this, that Apple's maximum penalty exposure at the rate of 10% of its average global turnover derived from all of its services globally for 3 fiscal years to 2024 could be around $38 billion, and such a penalty based on global global turnover would be manifestly arbitrary, unconstitutional, grossly disproportionate, unjust. How is it unconstitutional?
So Apple's case is that this is arbitrary, this is disproportionate. It will be too high. In case CCI exercises this entire power to impose penalty, the maximum penalty that it can impose. However, there are two elements that Apple does not seem to be considering. One, the language of the law says that the CCI may impose such penalty as it may deem fit, and then it caps the penalty to a maximum amount which shall be not more than the average turnover for the last 3 years. So there's a discretion. So 10% is the maximum amount. CCI can decide to put 5%, 2%, even 0.5%, or CCI may even decide that they don't want to impose any penalty.
Okay.
Secondly,
so,
there are
yeah.
No, let me clarify.
Yeah,
so secondly, there are penalty guidelines which have been issued along with these new amendments, where CCI has clarified how it will go about imposing the penalty. The first thing that they consider is 30% of the average relevant turnover. Again, the phrase relevant, not just the entire turnover. So they'll consider the 30% of the average relevant turnover from the product or service considered. And from that, they'll adjust it further based on many redeeming features. The total timeline of contravention, whether the concerned party has cooperated with the investigation or not. They'll consider all those redeeming features before deciding what the penalty is going to be. They will consider global turnover only in two cases. One, if they can't calculate the average relevant turnover. One. Second, if they feel that after coming to a particular penalty amount based on the system that I have just described, if CCI concludes that this is not going to have a deterrent effect, in that scenario only will CCI consider global turnover, not otherwise.
Right. Briefly to this one question, because we're running out of time, and I want to ask you two questions.
Yeah.
The companies also risk fines of as much as 10% of their global turnover for antitrust violations in the EU. We've already seen that in previous cases in Europe. Yeah. So why is this different in India? There's precedent, there's international precedent.
Yes, that's the reason when I made that comment, and I said it will be difficult to convince the court when court sees that these are the international acceptable provisions.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that with you. Yeah. There's context to what's going on right now. And there is another bit of a battle that is, ongoing, call it a battle or not. There's a Reuters report that says that India has instructed Google and Apple and others to go ahead with installing on their phones this cybersecurity app. Now, the telecom minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia, has said that the app is completely optional. If you want to delete it, if you can. All right? If you don't want to register, you shouldn't register. But it appears to me that it's suggesting that the companies still have to actually install these apps when they sell these apps on their phones when they have to sell them. This is happening in the background, and we've already had Reuters say that they are going to not do this, and they're going to present their viewpoint to the government and get into talks with the government. What's your take on all of this?
See, this is not a competition issue. This is a government regulatory issue. I think it's a little premature for me to comment on this.
Yeah, okay. I thought so. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. There is this context. Apple involved in the matter in the Delhi High Court with Competition Commission of India representing India, the government, and of course this other issue playing out, which is actually making headlines all across India. That was Gautam Shahi from Dua Associates. Much appreciated that you joined us and gave us perspective on this very interesting law. It's going to have repercussions potentially. But remember, you've seen in the past Tim Cook and Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting, shaking hands, having good discussions. So let's see how this really plays out. But for now, that's all the time we have on Inside India. Keep watching CNBC. Access Middle East is up next.